So what influenced your playing style so that you end up sounding like that?
Like this mess? Okay, well...
Your signature sound.
Yeah, well, I mean, I like open tunings, I like slide, I like standard tuning. I like a lot of things, but, you know, you start from the beginning, okay? You know, if you're my age, you know, 69, 70, or 10, 11 years old, right? And so what are you hearing? You're hearing the radio, AM radio. You know, I mean, you that's all you know, and it's good. It's all good. I mean, all those songs, they're good. It's not Jimi Hendrix good or anything like that, but they were all really good. You could do much worse of having something pounded into your head as a child. You know, all those songs have, you know, good guitar sounds, good guitar solos, good melodies.
What bands did you like?
Well, I mean, you know, like Three Dog Night and all this stuff that was on the radio, just the general stuff, and it was good. And what did you have? You had your little transistor radio, you know, and if you went home, you know, there was the radio in the kitchen. It was a little louder, you know, but still AM radio, right? And then, of course, you get a little older, and you get a receiver. You find it in the garbage or something, you know, and fix it like I would do.
Well, you did.
Yeah, and you get this thing that says FM on it. And it's in stereo, and you got two speakers, and you're like, "What's this FM shit?" And then if you from where I'm from, like Boston, you find this WBCN station, and then it's like Hendrix, Clapton, you know, all this kind of music you didn't hear on AM radio, and then you start running out buying the records and stuff, right?
Not Glenn Campbell.
Well, I heard Glenn Campbell when I was younger, and you know, maybe didn't appreciate how good he was then, but I would later. But anyway, long story short. Trying to stay on track here. You know, you all of a sudden you don't realize that you're starting in the wrong place if you're somebody my age, because you're hearing this stuff and you're thinking there's nothing that was ever better than this or ever going to be any better than this, right? And then so you start, you know, getting a little more refined as you get a little older. You start listening to the Beano record and all this, and then, you know, for me, I met some guys that were 10 years older than me. Okay. And were big influences on me because I would go jam with these guys, and at the end of the night, you know, they'd hand me a Muddy Waters record and say, "Do you know who this is?" And I'd go, "Never heard of him." You know, is he on FM radio? And anyway, you'd start taking these record homes and listening to them, and then just bang, you'd go, "Whoa, well, I started in the wrong place." I mean, I think this music is like the greatest thing since sliced bread, when all these guys are doing is copying these guys, you know, and then you go as far back as you can go. You start going further and further. You really, it takes years to study this, but you come up with Robert Johnson, right? There's no electric guitar yet, but you know, and then you hear that, and your mind's blown.
Can you imagine if he had an electric guitar?
If he had an electric guitar, it would be Johnny Winter. That's who it would be. Because you can take Johnny Winter, and he could have been one of those guys you were listening to in the middle somewhere, idolizing Johnny B. Good and all that, right? But then you get a little older, or you realize, you go back and listen to what he was doing, like on, like you listen to Johnny Winter live play Meantown Blues at Woodstock, and it's like that could be anywhere, beginning, middle, or end, right? I mean, it's just so powerful. If there was no electric guitar, you listen to a song like like Dallas, all acoustic, you know. So, you know, that would be a big musical influence, someone who played a lot of different, you know, and you didn't question, is he in G, is he in E? I mean, what, it didn't matter, it was just music, you know, just blues, and he didn't just trap himself into standard guitar tuning, you know, open it up into a lot of other things. But, you know, I mean, I can cite a million other people, but that would be one that,
Main one.
yeah, that would be a guy who would be timeless.
So he influenced you to play the way you play now. What influenced you to start building your guitars and your
Well, it comes from the
amplifiers?
same time. You know, I mean, there wasn't any money then to go to the store and just buy guitar amps and stuff, you know. So, and they weren't much money, but there still wasn't even that. So, you know, you would get old car radios and whatever you could get and make speaker cabinets out of bureau drawers and stuff. And this is the early days, you know. And
But your mom liked that.
Oh yeah, everyone loved it. You know, everyone locked their cars around me. But, you know, you'd start building guitar amps out of this junk, you know, and of course it's endless, and it just, and then guitars, I mean, I would go to the pawn shop and buy a $20 guitar, and the action would be this high, and I didn't even know anything about slide yet. If I did, I could have used those guitars, but, you know, your fingers would bleed playing them, and I didn't even know what a real guitar was until I finally saw one, and when I did, I looked at it and it all made sense more than the junky one, because I don't know why I didn't see this looking at the junky one, but when I looked at like a real Stratocaster, I went, hell, I can make that, you know? And so I did.
What about the amps? What made you decide you could make those?
Well, you needed it. You had to be louder than the other guy, right? I mean, the amp was, you know, like you had to have an amp, you know? I mean, that's all there is to it. So you had to start tinkering with that too, you know.
They were probably pretty inexpensive, weren't they?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, and then it just evolves, and then that's a whole nother subject of how I get into that. But that's the earliest of where I started making stuff, was, you know, scrapping it out of bits and pieces of whatever. And then of course it turns into this over the years, you know, and you know, and it is what it is.
So who else makes electronics that you talk to about it, and your peers in the industry of
Okay.
building
All right.
amplifiers or guitars or whatever?
Yeah, well, you know, my early years I was pretty much on my own, you know, because where are you going to meet somebody that does this? I mean, in daily life, you know, I mean, there wasn't any other guitar players I knew that could make their own guitar or make an amplifier or anything like that. So, you know, you think you're never going to meet anybody like that. And then, of course,
They would break too. You'd have to fix them. Huh?
yeah, and then I get started, you know, now we're flashing forward, all of a sudden I'm fixing everybody's stuff, you know, and I'm still pretty young, but now I'm in demand in Boston as a guitar repairman, amp repairman, luthier, so on and so forth. So, you know, we're flashing way forward here, but in the earliest days of that, you know, Berkeley kids, I was right around Berkeley, so, you know, I met a lot of really great players and worked for a lot of really great players that would become fantastic players later. And one of my buddies was from New Jersey, you know, and we hit it off the day we met, and became good friends and did a lot of business together. And he was in New York, New Jersey, and he would bring me carloads of guitars for all the famous guys in New York. Would give him his guitars to bring. And he would come, and I mean, he would bring me 20 guitars to refret, and he would just stay in my shop till they were done, and then take them all back, and we'd settle up on the cash, and everybody made a little money, and everybody got a nice playing guitar. But this guy was always telling me about a guy he knew in New Jersey, that, oh, you got to meet this guy, and he was telling that guy, oh, you got to meet this guy, you know. And that guy was a guy named Ken Fischer.
So you met him through your other friend?
Yeah, through Jim. So, you know, one of the trips back to New York, I'm still really young here, you know.
How old were you?
You know, I don't know. It's hard to remember all that stuff.
you remember what year it was?
No, I don't. But Ken and I hit it off right away, because it was like meeting somebody else into the same
Meeting of the minds?
crazy world, yeah. And
So what was your friendship with him
his
based
amps
on?
were at that time were in the beginning stages. So I mean, they were mostly prototypes, and I was listening to stuff he had worked on, like Marshalls and stuff that he modified in early visits, and so on and so forth. And he never really came to Boston because Ken didn't really get out of the house much. But so, most of our visits were all at Ken's.
Oh, at his house?
Yeah, because he wasn't much on traveling around. But and then I knew him through the years, and
Well, so what was your friendship really based on then?
well, it would be it would start as just cool friends who like the same stuff and so on and so forth.
Did he play
But then-
guitar?
Yeah, he played guitar. Yeah. So then next thing you know, we didn't, that thing in your hand, that cell phone. Maybe some of the younger guys, we didn't have that then. And it costed money to talk on the phone. I mean, it costed money. They didn't give you the ability to just talk to anybody you wanted.
I remember. Talked to Grandma. He's like,
Yeah.
okay, now time to get off now.
Exactly.
It's expensive.
Your father would set a timer on the phone when you were a kid. No more than 10 minutes.
Back in the Stone Age.
But anyway, long story short,
How long did you know Ken?
Ken's bill and my phone bill became enormous because we would just talk for hours, and
Back then, only the person who called had to pay, huh? It was free to get the call.
yeah, so we would go back and forth on who called who, but it was really cool because we were working towards the same goal,
What was that?
great sounding amps. So we would trade notes on what was going on with what we were doing,
Were you guys both trying to do the same exact thing, or some?
No,
some
he
different?
was looking for a different sound than I was looking for. I was always looking for like a big human voice kind of sound. You know what I mean? And Ken had his own really unique ideas of what he was looking for. So, that was probably, see, Ken helped a lot of people out over the years. And I know you're probably going to ask me the question of how he feels about everybody copying his amps, right? And
Yeah, how did he feel about
Well-
it? Were they doing it back then too?
yeah, the point would be that would bolster why our friendship was the way it was, is because we were looking for different things. It would be preposterous for him to think he would help somebody out to do the same thing he's doing.
Right.
It wouldn't even click in his head that would make any sense. It would be like, why would anybody be, doing that? But, as we know, that's what the whole modern world is all about now. And it's just silly. But anyway, Ken and I were looking for different things. So when we traded notes, it would be mutual. It would help me out. It would help him out,
Why did he call his amps Trainwrecks?
Well,
It evokes a chaotic.
it does. It's chaos, but it if you've ever seen on a motion picture an actual train wreck that they film, they take a real expensive, huge train and they end the track and they
Yeah,
run
they
that
run
thing.
it off of
Yeah,
bridge
it's
or something.
incredible. It's like, it's the most chaos you can ever have. He always loved that image, and so that's what he called his company,
It's so apocalyptic.
Right, exactly. But I was always more on the line of Class A single-ended, and Ken was on that for a while too. That's when we traded a lot of notes back and forth, and he just abandoned it and went back to, because by then his line of 3 amps were pretty cemented down to what he wanted, So he wasn't looking for anything else, and
How come he didn't put handles on his amps?
I used to ask him that all the time. I don't.
He never played outside of the house.
Yeah, he never had a good
to
answer for me.
transport
But
it.
there's things you just don't say to somebody. But I could say anything to him, and I
I
used to
thought
go,
it looked prettier without it.
I know, I used to always go to pick up his amps and make like, where do I pick this up, Ken? You know, like there's no handle, you know. Because everyone would tell me that. All my friends that owned his amps and my amps would go, I wish that guy would just put a handle on that amp. And they'd say, if I bring it over, will you do it? And I'd say, no, I'm not touching it. He didn't put a handle on it. You know, pick it up, just pick the thing up. But anyway, it was funny.
So how did you guys mainly differ in the way you were doing your stuff?
Well, it's very different. It's very
I've
different.
heard that all his, like every single one was kind of an experiment where, you know, it
No,
wasn't wired
that's
just the
people
same
who
as the
don't
last
know
one.
what they're talking about talking. Let me tell you what the reality of that is, okay? When he started building, he started taking Marshalls, okay, and putting a separate transformer in them for a 6.3 filament supply directly with a separate cord you plug into the wall, okay?
Okay.
And then, I might be talking over your head here, but then he would take the power transformer of that amp, and you would have to buy a variac, and he would set the variac, and it would drop the voltage way down. And then he would take the EL34s out of the amp and put a pair of 6V6s in the amp, and then do some circuit tweaks. And the reason why he had to put that other transformer in is if you lower the mains voltage, you're going to lower your filament voltage too. And, you know, guys do that all the time, but they don't know what they're doing because the tube has to see 6.3 volts. If it's not seeing that, it's going to be a problem.
Sounds terribly complicated, so
Well, but anyway, that's what he started, and it was a 22 watt amp, and they didn't blow up like everyone was. Well, I had my own mods for Marshalls, and he had his, and his was really interesting, and it was cool and all that, because we, you know, this was before we were meeting minds, you know, so I was totally my way, he was totally his. But when I first saw that, I went, hey, that's
and you
pretty
weren't
cool.
actually building your own amps, you were just modifying Marshalls.
Yeah, no, I'd started building my own amps then by that time, but no, maybe not. Maybe that's early enough where I first saw those Marshalls and played through them and went, yeah, that's cool. You know, and I was doing not that, but I was beefing them up so they wouldn't blow up and giving them more gain and that. And he was giving them more gain too, you know.
Well,
But
he actually worked for an amplifier manufacturer, right?
yeah, he worked for Ampeg for a while, you know, and we never really talked about that too much because Ampeg, I mean, you know, I mean, what the greatest thing you could have done there is make a bass amp, and not that that's nothing, because that's probably the best bass amp ever made. But you know, they had a few good little amps too. But you know, it's Ampeg. Come on, you know. So anyway, you know, moving on from Ampeg was obviously.
How do you end up
something.
with a wooden box? Is that kind of different than
Well,
everyone else?
before that, I want to go back to. So these Marshalls were like 20 watts when he was done with them, and then of course, you know, he started to build his own amps off of what he had done to that, and it morphed into the Express. You know, and the early Expresses had 6V6s, and then of course he went back to EL34s to get a little more power out of them. But I didn't answer your question yet on why everybody thinks that he did every amp different, okay?
Oh,
He didn't. What happened is, one of the first things I noticed when I first met Ken and he was showing me his amp is I'm looking at the output transformer in his amp, and I went, that's a Stancore 3801. And he goes, you know that transformer? I'm like, yeah, I use that in my amps. That's the best sounding off-the-shelf transformer I've ever found. And he had found it too. But as we were talking, having that conversation, probably the factory stopped making that transformer because, you know, within, you know, a very short time, neither of us could get them. And if I found some surplus, I would send him some and keep some for myself, whatever. But I mean, they were getting really hard to find. So now you had to go make your own transformer, okay? And now all you guys that build copies of amps, you got it easy. You got Mercury, you got transformer companies all over the place. Right? We didn't have that, all right? So it's a little tougher to get a transformer made when Ken and I were doing this, okay? So
unless you wanted the transformers they were using in things that were already made.
no, and you couldn't do that because you just couldn't do that with his design or mine, especially mine. You know, all this power single-ended. There's no way. But even his push-pull amp that was originally a Marshall with a Marshall output transformer, that transformer would never be good enough for the tone of his amp. You know, now Stancore 3801 was a really good transformer, really sweet-sounding transformer. You could manipulate the tone with your hands off. It wasn't like it's going to just sound like this no matter what, like certain Marshall transformers. And anyway, so why did he have to mess with every amp? Well, because I'm not going to mention any names, but I was using this company as well as him. They were out here in California, and they were terribly inconsistent. Okay, it's that simple. All this talk and all the, listen, the transformers were inconsistent. They all sounded different.
Oh,
Okay.
that's why his amps, because it was his supplier.
Right, me too. So when you got the amp all done and you fired it up, you knew pretty much everything else you were doing, and then you'd listen to that transformer and go, okay, I got to tweak this amp now. And if, you know, now you're undoing things you've soldered, you're starting to make a mess. I mean, really, because you really, it's not the best way to build an amp. And if you can't, you learn to know quick enough if you're not going to get what you want with a few simple changes. Out, that transformer's out and in the trash can. And the next one goes in.
Heavy,
you know.
expensive trash.
Heavy, expensive, yeah. And I'm not going to get into this other story that some of you guys know out there about a certain guy that could tell you if a transformer was going to
Oh, I remember that.
sound good or not by
Psychic
putting his
power.
hands on it. But he was usually
Some
always
people do
right.
that with crystals.
He was usually always right. And I don't even want to get into that conversation because people think you're nuts when you talk like that.
Okay, well then just explain why he put him in a wooden box.
Okay, so anyway, that's why, you know, there's different things in each train wreck, right? And my early amps is because you had to tune to those transformers.
Okay, so you were tweaking.
Right, now I get transformers that they make exactly the same every time. And still everyone sounds a little different. But now I don't have to do anything because the little difference is always really good. You know, and if you didn't know my amps really good, you wouldn't, I could play you 5 amps and you would go, well, I don't hear any difference. But I do because I know the amp really well, so, you know.
I know, I couldn't hear any difference in those ones
No,
you were
but
showing.
and that's a great difference to have, especially me when I play in stereo. If one has a slightly different,
I remember
you know,
when you were picking out which one you were going to give Dave next for his...
yeah, to
stereo.
match the other one. They all have a slight special charm, you know, and I don't have to touch them because it's all good, you know. So, but that didn't exist back then, and that's the whole thing about Ken's amps being, oh, why does he make everyone different than the? He didn't want to, you know. He had
He
his
had to.
one amp that sat out on his coffee table, and that was the model, you know. Everything got compared to that, you know. So he would go in and tweak the amp, change capacitors and resistors to try to force another amp to sound like that amp. And when I say we all were doing, there wasn't a lot of us anyway, okay. But if you were around back then, you know the story. You had to do that because transformers were inconsistent.
How many amps did he make? Do you know? Does anyone know?
I don't know, and I really don't care. It's never been a thing that you know. A lot of people ask me that question.
Did you say Jim made him those logos?
Yeah, my friend made those Trainwreck logos for him, and he knows because he knows how many logos he made for him, and he's told me before, and I don't. It's not something I even care
Like
about
50 or
because,
something?
yeah, I don't know. You know, I honestly forget exactly what he told me for the numbers, but
And why the wooden box?
well, for years I would visit Ken, and he, you know, oh, I got the Liverpool now. You got to hear this one, you know, and he'd hand me the guitar and I'd fire it up and start wailing away on it. Yeah, it's cool, and it was always, and the amp would be dancing on the coffee table as I'm playing, and he had all these killer vintage cabinets.
It would move?
Like I did too. Yeah, they would move because
Why?
well, his transformers were really close together, right? Because of the way he designed the amps, and he had to shove a wooden dowel down between them because
They'd vibrate?
the magnetic field would just go crazy between them, and if you really started playing, I mean, you've seen my amps when I'm burning them in on the bench. They're humming over there and rattling on the bench because
I know.
they're not hooked up
Rattling?
to a speaker. They're hooked up to dummy loads, and they're getting the shit kicked out of them. I got such a huge signal just wailing through them so that they're almost catching on fire, you know, to burn them in, to make sure they're going to work good for the rest of their lives and to burn everything in.
Do you know anyone else?
But
who
my
makes
transformers are on opposite sides of the chassis. His were like right close together. So anyway, that answers your question. They would actually move on the table. But they were on, that's what they were. They were a chassis on the table. And I remember one day I was over there and he goes, yeah, so-and-so's coming to pick up his amp, the one you're playing to. I'm like, cool. And the guy turned out to be a really good guitar player who I met, who I would know for years. And I watched him pick the amp up and walk out with it. And I was like, you know, I was all against this stuff that looked like Marshalls and Fenders back then. My shit all went in racks, okay? It looked more like that amp up there, right? And the gold amps all in racks, because I didn't want to look like other amps. I don't know why, it just was just this thing. But they had flanges on them to go in.
You wanted everyone to see the pretty teeth.
Yeah. But you know, you could put them in something, and it used to puzzle me. I said, Ken, where's he gonna put that? It was not of a concern of his. He just made a great amp that sounded incredible. A great guitar player came and played it and went, I'll take it, you know, and that was it. So you took it and you bolted it down into a rack or something, you know what I mean? And it used to baffle me, but it was what it was. And then one day I was over there, and he said, you gotta see, I finally put them in something. And I'm looking at it, and I'm like, you know, he lived in the basement pretty much where he was all day down there, and he had there was a radiator down there with a radiator cover on it. And I'm looking at the amp, and I'm looking at the radiator cover, and it looked just like the radiator cover. It was like a real early version of one of his boxes, you know. And but of course it morphed from there. Some guy walked in and saw that and said, I can make you some really nice boxes, you know. And that's where that started. So then they went in wooden boxes, and his sister did the wood burnings on the front panels of each one. And it wasn't anything he wanted. It was whatever she wanted to do. You know, she wanted to make a whale or a train crashing or whatever, or a bumblebee, whatever she felt like doing, you know.
And he named them individually with women's names?
With women's names individually, yeah.
Did he engrave that on there, or how was that designated?
You know, that's a good question. I don't remember ever seeing that. And a lot of my customers owned his amps.
You just told him, this is Evelyn.
Yeah, a lot of my customers owned his amps, and they were always with my amps. You know, when I'd go to see them, that, you know, that would be sitting right beside. So I looked at them so many times over there, and then you know, at other friends' houses, and I never noticed that. They used to use those, what do you call that, when you go and it makes the...
Oh, one of those labelers?
Labeler things, you know.
And they make the letters white when they pushed up the letter through the plastic.
Yeah, and that's kind of cool, you know, but I don't remember. I used to read that, and I don't remember ever seeing the name of the amp on that. I think
it was wood burning. She could have burned it.
Yeah, I think it's just common knowledge that whatever was on the wood burning and what the name was given to the amp was remembered, because these amps get passed around to people from person to person. That
is there some master list?
They keep the lineage intact. I'm sure somebody has it. You know, maybe there's this guy named Glenn. I forget his last name.
Do you have a master list?
I remember his name, but I don't want to say it because I might say it wrong. But he was a pretty big follower of where all the amps were and so on and so forth. You know, but now there's so many fakes. You know that it's who
like
knows now.
Bootleg.
Oh yeah.
Pretending to be genuine.
Right.
Really?
Yeah. And people talk about, oh, that doesn't sound like a real Trainwreck, or that nails it. And these guys never even heard one. They don't know. You know. And I never heard a bad one. Or one that wasn't stellar, so.
So any other influences on your electronics? Is there anyone else building amps like you and Ken?
Well, there's other guys I've met over the years. I met Jim Kelly a couple of times. He made a pretty... See, I'm interested in original amps, okay? That guy made a pretty original amp. Most of these other guys, it's all just copies of stuff, you know. But there's more. I can get into a lot of names. And when I went to L.A. and finally finished the pinnacle of my big gold amp design, you know, I'd been telling Ken what I'd been doing all along, and he was dying to see him. So a whole rack was going out, and let me get a picture for a second. The whole rack was going out to New Jersey to the guy who actually introduced me to Ken, Jim. And it would be the preamp, the eight single-ended tube single-ended amp, and this power amp here. So Ken would receive this, okay? That's like massively impressive. I mean, the weight of that and the amount, the crates, if it was coming to your house and you were unpacking that, you'd be like, what the hell was Bob up to, you know? Because I called Ken and I said, hey, listen, you know, I'm sending this stuff out to Jim, and I don't even know if he knows how to plug tubes in or what, you know? And plus, you know, if you do me this favor and set these amps up for him, you'll get to see what I was doing. Go ahead, open them up, have some fun. So, you know, he just blew his mind when that stuff came in.
What year was that,
Stuff was
approximately?
massive. It was like 89, maybe. Like, don't drop that on that guitar. Let me move the guitar. It was like 89 or something. But, so, you know, it was just, you know, he finally, you know, figured out what I'd been up to. He'd seen my earlier amps, but, you know, when he saw this stuff, it was like, whoa, you know. We talked about that, how the phone bill for each of us went on for a couple of weeks over that, you know, and he did, and he took care of it for Jim, and Jim came there and picked them up from there and racked them, because I didn't ship them in the rack. I used to pack them all in bubble wrap, and then send the rack separately so they didn't implode in the rack because they were so friggin' heavy, you know. And anyway, Ken took care of all that for me and got to see those amps and just see exactly what I was up to.
I want to hear about his
all that
pet
time.
spider, too.
No, we'll leave that. But that's here's my point, you know, original amps, you know, when Ken saw that stuff, it was like, whoa, you know, it's like what he was doing was building original amps. So when you ask me any other guys, yeah, I see a million clones of this and clones of that and clones of this, and it's got to be an amp you even like to really give a shit.